Hello, you malt mentioning mastodonts, more memorable. Bit of a curious malt mention that, but we're going to go with it because this is a maltly diverse channel you're on. So we celebrate all the malt moments, even when they're a little bit of a tongue twister. And a big thank you to Artificial Frequencies for that malt mention, introducing Ralphie Review 1002. I'm clearly getting ahead of myself a little bit there. I better pour a little glass of whiskey just to kind of calm me down slightly. Ooh, what a wonderful colour. Look at the colour. What a fantastic colour. It must be a really tasty whiskey just because of the colour. No, of course not. Absolutely not. Because many casks can be differently coloured using different colouring components. So never judge a whiskey by its colour. This is a particular interesting whiskey. It's a rather unusual whiskey. At the moment it's still a very rare whiskey, but I'm reviewing this because I find it particularly interesting. This whiskey is from Brazil. And the only reason I learned about this was because of Patreon subscribers, what I call Pat Pals. And on my Patreon subscription channel, I have quite regular conversations, personal message and all the rest of it from subscribers. And it included a link to a recent bottling by Cadenheads, the independent bottlers of Scotch whisky, to a rather unusual bottling. Brazilian whisky. Brazilian single malt whisky. It's a single cask, 5 years old, which is fine because if the whisky's been made in Brazil, it's made in a hotter climate, and therefore, like rums, it will mature more quickly. And the details, specific details, if you're really curious to try and find a bottle, but I doubt there's any left, but don't worry about it, it'll be more along soon, I'm sure. Distilled in 2017, bottled in the summer of 2023 from an Oloroso hogshead, number of bottles 264, bottled at 56.9%, and it says on the back label of the bottle that this has been matured in a Oloroso cask since March 2021. So if it's been bottled in 2023, it's either been 1.5 or 2 years in this Oloroso hogshead, which is going to be responsible because you can clearly see that it's a pretty new cask by the sheer depth of the colour. And I suspect that Cadenheads put the Brazilian whisky into this fresh Oloroso cask to really lift its character, lift its flavour profile, and lift its sellability. I anticipate, and I don't know for sure, but even when you go out looking for facts, they can be rather thin in the ground and you end up getting someone's opinion rather than genuine facts. So I'll just tell you what I think the situation is. That in the Union Distillery in Brazil, they've made this whiskey and they've put it into a standard available ex-bourbon cask or something similar. Then it has come to the attention of an independent bottler who have bought maybe 1, 2, 3, 4 casks, probably not that many, but they know they'll be able to sell it because of the growing interest in international global whiskies. And I think that as soon as people have looked at the price and the colour of this whisky, they've thought, that's a novelty, that's exotic, I'd like a bottle of that. So I bought a bottle, and I'm going to share the experience with you. And the reason I'm doing this is because there's not a lot of whiskey coming from Brazil. Plenty of rum, lots of cachaça, and the world's second largest location for sake, right? Brazil's a big country, but now we know that Brazil is the home of a whisky industry, and that one of these distilleries is called the Union Distillery. Now, as soon as I read that, I go on to Google Maps and I actually go to the specific geographical location which shows the distillery. And the reason I do that's simple. I just want to see the environment. Is it in a desert? Is it in lush jungle? Is it in foothills at higher elevation where the climate's a little bit cooler and the air's a little bit thinner? I just want to get some general bearings as to the provenance, the physical, locational provenance as to the whisky. And what it suggests is that, and we don't think of this, the southern part of Brazil is moving away from the equator. As a result, the temperatures are getting cooler. And particularly in higher ground, you're going to be in a position where you can grow grains successfully, including malted barley. Why not? So here you've got a distillery. They may already be making rum, they may be making other spirits, but they decide they're going to make some whiskey. Because particularly if you're a tourist visiting Brazil, you know, you go into a bar, they've got Brazilian rum, they've got Brazilian cachaça, and then, my goodness, they've also got a bottle of Brazilian whiskey. So they're going to definitely get some sales because of the curiosity factor. So what does this smell of? Now, even before I put my nose into it, and I've had a couple of glasses, it's more than a couple of glasses, I've had a few small glasses out of this just to get my bearings. But already I'm anticipating the big, sweet sherry overcoat. Now, there's no harm in that, because if it improves the whiskey, fine, it improves the experience. I'm not going to get overly critical and judgmental about it. I'm going to be pragmatic. That's the word. On the nose. Lots of fruitcake and raisins. So, definitely. It's the sherry cask from the last year and a half, 2 years, which is calling all the shots here. But behind that sherry cask will be Brazilian single malt whiskey. Wood sour. A little bit hot. Biscuity. It's almost not quite burnt biscuits, but overcooked cookies and hard biscuits, like ship's biscuits. Short arrival, quite a rapid development, and quite a soft and particularly sweet finish. This has been a relatively, I'm going to be nice about it and call it feisty, but pragmatists would call it a little bit rough. But that's not a problem, because it's a young whiskey. It's only 5 years old. Could it have benefited from more years in the cask? Yes, but not this cask. This cask, in a very short space of time, is basically overwhelmed and sugar-coated the whiskey in the background in order to do something with it. And it makes it interesting. Is it a great whiskey? No, it's not. Is it an interesting whiskey? Most definitely yes. It's exotic. It's a taste of something from somewhere else, where you know that if they brought out fully Brazilian matured 5, 8, 10-year-old whiskey from slow run stills, particularly pot stills, and if they matured in active casks, and if they used Amburana wood, locally unique indigenous wood to Brazil, and other local indigenous woods to help add flavour, to the whisky, it would be an absolute banger. It would become really interesting. This is not a whisky I recommend to anybody but a completely geeky whisky anorak. This is one for the real whisky curious who want to go out exploring the world, literally the world of whisky. I'm going to add some water to this because I know it definitely helps. I know that doesn't make it sound particularly promising, and I'm adding 1.5 teaspoons, so that is 7.5 millilitres. What it will do is it will tone down the heaviness and the weight of that sherry cask influence, which has been fairly severely imposed over the original spirit, which, being rather aggressive, is not such a bad thing. There's something slightly Irish on the nose. There's a mintiness and a green note, a green barley note rather than golden. So it's almost as if there's something about it which is that traditional Irish pot still style of malted and unmalted barley. So what I'm really kind of picking up on is there's a greenness in the grain on the nose. It's almost as like it had been harvested and steeped and germinated whilst not quite ripe. Such an improvement. It's extraordinary. It's amazing. With adding the water and giving it time, the character, the remarkably Irish pot still character of this Brazilian whiskey really jumps forward. The cask's still an overcoat, but far less than it was having added the water now. I don't anticipate it's going to open up a lot. I don't anticipate it's going to turn from an ugly little duckling into a beautiful, graceful swan. What I do anticipate is, and what I've found from experience, is that it turns from a little ugly duckling to a larger, less ugly duckling, to put it into context. But it is a really, really interesting experience, because you feel you're tasting some of the whiskies of tomorrow, because we do not consider Brazil to be a whisky maker, and yet what's happening is globally there are far more whisky distilleries opening up now than rum distilleries, because for quite a long time the rum industry has put it out there, along with their fan base, that rum is going to be the next big thing. And rum's it's going to be the next big thing is going to be the next big thing over the next 10 years. It comes back to whisky. And when whisky is being produced in countries that we don't expect to be producing whisky because of their geographical climate and location, we've got to then realise that there's not just one variety or a stock commercial family of barley grain styles and varieties out there. Barley, like rye, like sugarcane, is far more diverse as a global crop than we tend to realise. And so barley's grown in South America, and it has a different style, a different flavour. It is kind of it's greener. I would imagine that in many ways Brazilian barley is kind of similar to what they would call local barley or old style varieties of barley used in Scotland. And as a whisky geek, treating myself at the end of a year, towards the end of a year, where I've been really focusing for the first time on a global whisky trot, this is a really good way to finish it. And I'm going to continue this with my next review, Ralphie review number 1002 Extras, in which, having declared that I've bought this bottle to my Patreon subscribers, I've had Patreon subscribers come back to me and give me more information, and I'm going to take the opportunity to actually share that information with you as the extras, because it's just really, really interesting. Make no mistake about it, malt mates, as well as just actually reviewing this whisky and giving you a malt mark, this review is so much more. I'm really talking about the more general awareness that is growing in the global whisky scene, that whisky is not just about Scotland, it's not just about bourbon in the USA. Things are about to explode in the diversity of variety of styles, shapes, flavours, forms and sensations to be found in whisky from all around the world, using not just malted barley, but combining malted and unmalted barley, combining barley with other grains, because bourbon, although it's called bourbon, is in fact a whisky because it's exclusively made from grains. All spirit made from grains is a whisky. If your vodka is made from grain, from winter harvested wheat crops in the Siberian steppes, it's a whisky. It's a whisky vodka. It's the fact of it. Cheers. Few more tasting notes before I give you the mark. There's a resinous growing in here, a kind of cola type resinous, gingery. The addition of the water is really what surprises, what's delighting me is the way the signature and the character, despite the big heavy overcoat of an Oloroso sherry hogshead for over a year in the maturation process, the signature, the feistiness, the energy, the vitality, the signature of this Brazilian single malt whisky is really coming out, and it's different. It is not trying to be Scotch whisky. It's not pretending to be Scotch whisky. It doesn't need to be Scotch whisky. Malt mates, it's Brazilian whisky, and I'm delighted to be reviewing this for you. It's just a character. That's what it is. Another taste before I give my mark. It's a creaminess coming in, and virgin oak wood. Distinctive note of virgin oak. It's been assimilated by the whisky because it started its maturation in a hot climate. Very well, but it's a little bit overimposed. If the virgin oak casks had been pre-toasted for a longer term to caramelise the juices and the sugars within the wood, you'd have a much more tempered and subtle result. But very interesting. Is it a great whisky? No, I said it wasn't a great whisky. It's not a great whisky. It's not supposed to be. It's a beginning whisky. It's a whisky that's just finding its way in the world, that's going out there. It's inexperienced. It's naive. It's lacking complexity. It's lacking sophistication. It's lacking all the points of reference that I take for granted from a single Scotch malt whisky. But I tell you what, I'm loving this. I'll have this bottle for quite a while because it's exotic to me. It's a novelty. From the continent of rum, we're getting a whisky. And I think this is very much a reflection of the zeitgeist of the moment we're living in the general history of alcoholic beverages in the year 2023. I'm giving it 80 out of 100. It's a good bona fide integrity, by the way. Let's not forget about it. It's bottled by Cadenheads. It's an integrity malt mark. And just, for a jaded old hack like me, I find this to be a treat, an absolute treat. So join me for Ralphie Review 1002, in which I shall be telling you a little bit more about this, courtesy of online communications. See you soon.